Welcome, everyone, to Talking Back to Suicide. This is one of your hosts, Dr. Diane Kaufman, though I like to be called Diana for my creative self. I'm a poet, artist, Humanism and Medicine awardee, retired child psychiatrist, and the founder-director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. And I'm with my co-host, Kino Isaac, who's coming to us from South Africa. Kino is a DJ, music producer, entrepreneur, and very importantly, a mental health advocate for independent artists. And I'd like to introduce to you today our special guest, Mary Beth O'Connor. Mary Beth is the award-winning author of From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. This is not a work of fiction. It is a memoir, the story of Mary Beth, a retired federal magistrate judge, and her life's journey from childhood trauma, including violence, abuse, neglect, the mental health distress leading to substance abuse, culminating in her addiction to her drug of choice, methamphetamine. Most importantly, Mary Beth's From Junkie to Judge authentically describes how she courageously survived by creating and then walking the path she could take step by step towards healing, sobriety, and recovery. As a trauma-informed, lived experience expert leader, Mary Beth sharing her powerful story exemplifies breaking through silent shame and stigma. She's a board member at large of the She Recovers Foundation and was founding member of the She Recovers Support for Legal Professionals. Mary Beth is a sought-after speaker, writer, and trainer, combining her hard-won expertise in addiction, mental health, and resilience with the aim to raise awareness and hope by educating, uplifting, and being of service to others. So very warm welcome, Mary Beth, to Talking Back to Suicide.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for that lovely introduction.
Oh, you're most welcome. What's it like for you to hear, someone relaying some of your story?
Yeah, I mean, I say I try to use, my story as sort of the entry point. And at this point, that former judge title is sort of a tool for ear opening. It sort of gets people's attention because it's unusual arc. And I try to use that to share information that I think is important, to try to use my personal story as a reassurance that there's a way out, not just from addiction, but from trauma and mental health, which is that combination. I am not unique in that combination. I mean, it is all too common. And just to also let people know about multiple pathways to recovery, how, there are different ways to recover. A lot of us have to tackle more than one thing. A lot of us will use more than one strategy, more than one program. All of those things is sort of this is my retirement life, right? Writing and speaking and training. It's been a new opportunity for me to talk more openly about my story and to try to use it to provide value to others.
When you just said, Mary Beth, about being able to be more open about your story, within the legal profession or with your judge colleagues, at what point did you start to share your story? And what was the reception to that?
Yeah, so I first told the agency that I worked for when I was a judge that I was in recovery when I joined the board for LifeBring and for She Recovers. And so it's considered like an outside activity, and you have to run it through ethics. And so that was the first notice. But it was general. It was, I've got, at the time, 23 years of sobriety. I'm joining these boards. Here's what I'm going to do. But I did at that time when I was a judge start publishing some pieces about my history, but you might have had to look for them. I wasn't advertising it broadly. And I was working on my book, but it was like a hobby. It was a side project. And so it wasn't until I retired that I finished my book, but also I had my first major publication. I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal. And that, once you're in the Wall Street Journal, that Google will follow that with your name forever, So that was a very public announcement. So that's
Did,
sort of how.
did you have colleagues reaching out to you having read the article? And what were they saying to you?
I have had colleagues reaching out and other judges that I didn't know. And I will say the number one reason they reach out to me is about friends and family. They have someone in their family who's in trouble. They have a friend who's in trouble and they want to, some advice and guidance on how to handle that. That's the most common reason that people reach out, or they have a speaking opportunity. There's a judges conference coming up, or, can I talk to their local, judge group or whatever that might be. But those are the two most common reasons.
As you were just speaking, I was remembering that I had been a board member of an organization called ASHA International, based in here in Portland. It's since closed with them maybe 2 years ago, but there was many years of service, and it had to do with the power of personal storytelling in mental health recovery. And the ASHA is a Sanskrit word that means healing. And there I was a board member as well as a storyteller myself, with my own mental health history of being a psychiatrist, but also having attempted suicide when I was in medical school and becoming a psychiatrist. But there was one of the board members was a lawyer, and he had some difficulty with anxiety. And he would be giving presentations to lawyers around anxiety and panic. Does that resonate with you in terms of the legal profession and people that might be drawn to the field, as well as it's pretty anxiety producing to be in that field?
Yeah, so there's two sides of that answer. One is that I do continuing legal education training for lawyers and judges. They have, like they do for, doctors, right? You have continuing legal ed requirements, and it's on substance use in the legal profession. But attorneys have double the rate of addiction to every drug. Across all drugs, their addiction rate is double the national average, and there is a much higher rate of depression and anxiety as well. And there are multiple reasons for that. And it's one of the things I talk about in my training. I mean, for example, the hours, right? I mean, usually attorneys, they don't work 9 to 5. The hours can be long, the workloads are heavy, you're juggling multiple matters. There's really not always enough time to sort of decompress, but also to see, am I actually happy with what I'm doing, or am I not? You're just on this treadmill, running. And so that short-term relief of picking up alcohol or cannabis or some other substance is appealing, because you sort of don't have the window of time to stand back and figure out what's really going on and, what do I want to do about it? And so that's one of the reasons. Another is the expectation of perfection from attorneys. You know what a mistake is called? It's called malpractice. I mean, you're really not allowed to make an error, which is an unrealistic expectation. And that creates a lot of stress and anxiety. So there's multiple reasons why that's true, but it's definitely mental health. And of course, substance use disorder, addiction is a mental health disorder, right?
Yes.
So mental health disorders of all kinds are more prevalent in the legal profession than the general population.
Do you feel that that's changing in terms of the amount of people who are affected?
I think there is a push by the American Bar Association for about especially like the last 7 or 8 years, to get firms to address this, but also to make sure that firms make resources available, that there's sort of a more openness to say, if you have these issues, we're here to help you, we're here to provide guidance. We're here to figure out a way to allow you to get treatment while you still have your job. There is a push for that. At the same time, law firms are especially large law firms, are very billable hours oriented, and it's really hard for them to stop that. But I will say, when I talk to the lawyers who are at firms, one of the things I do emphasize for addiction is that they need to think about addiction at the same way they would any other mental health disorder. In other words, if somebody came to them because they were having a depression and they needed treatment, or they needed a break for treatment, they should look at an addiction in the same way. They should put it in the same box, because that's not always true. There's more stigma attached to a substance use disorder than to other types of mental health disorders. There's more fear. There's a lack of understanding. In fact, that's literally why a lot of my trainings, one of the slides is, what is substance use disorder and why am I calling it that? Like, that's where I start sometimes. But what I try to put in their mind is to put it in that same box as all mental health disorders and treat it in the same way. So is it better? It's better. Is it where it needs to be? Do people always feel comfortable going to the partner if they run into trouble or asking for time off or treatment? They don't always feel comfortable.
I was reading something recently around self-care for therapists, or self-care for broaden it to mental health providers. And in the article, I found it interesting that they also talked about an ethical responsibility to have self-care for oneself.
That's interesting. I mean, that's interesting. You know, the truth is the attorney ethics rules, there is a rule that if your physical or mental health is interfering with your ability to do the job that you should be doing, in other words, to meet your ethical obligations, to do the work, to not ask for extensions or, you know, delays, and to not interfere with your ability to get back to the client, that any mental disorder that has a negative impact on that ability, it's actually an ethics violation to keep doing the work. You need to either refuse new clients or disengage from current clients so that you only have the amount of work that you are ethically able to handle.
Could you share with us a bit of your journey? I mentioned from what I had read of you that there was a family history of violence and other difficulties. Maybe could you start with, was there a time when that wasn't a problem? Was there a shift in the family that increased that turmoil?
I mean, there was always an issue. My mother was a lot of it in the beginning, the first, let's say 9 years of my life were around my mother, who was very volatile, you know, got angry easily, was very explosive. But she also was emotionally neglectful. I mean, we were fed, we were clothed, but she wasn't really interested in what I was doing. She wasn't paying attention. She got irritated if you wanted attention. So there was sort of that, there was no sense of having a parent who cared about you or who was supportive or who was going to, you know, take care of you in any kind of problem that arose, unless it was like a medical issue. So that was always there. And I showed anxiety symptoms as far back as I can remember in childhood, and some OCD-like symptoms. Like I used to have counting behaviors when I remember being 4 years old and doing it. I used to have soothing behaviors when I was trying to get to sleep. Those kind of things were there from the beginning. But my mother.
Could you say something about those soothing behaviors? What were they?
So I would count if someone was talking and I wanted it to end on an odd number. And if it didn't, I would say something to make it end on an odd number. And so I was always tracking that. Well, often, not always, often. When I was going to sleep, I made each of my fingers, I made them a character. Like one was a teacher and a fireman and I don't know, a dog. I don't remember. And they would have conversations, you know what I mean? Like they would be talking to each other when I was laying in bed trying to get to sleep. And I think it was a way of trying to get my mind not focused on my life, but, you know, focused on something more fun or distracting to help me get to sleep. So those were two that I clearly remember. And there was another one when my brother was young, because I was older. I used to have a hairbrush set, you know, a comb, a brush, and a mirror. And there was this thing when I was a kid about brush your hair 100 times before you went to bed. So I would be doing my hair at night, and if I believed I had to put the comb, mirror, and brush in a certain order on my dresser, and if I didn't, something bad would happen to my brother. And sometimes I would freeze because I realized I wasn't sure if I had done it right, and then I would get scared. So I had those kind of behaviors very, very early on.
Did anyone notice that at home that you were doing this, or did you tell anybody?
No one noticed, and I certainly would have told my mother. I mean, I knew better than to go to her with things, you know, but I knew that from when I was young. And then that becomes a problem when you're surrounded by abuse, which did escalate when I was 9, when she married my stepfather, because I knew my mother wasn't there for me. She wasn't going to listen or be interested or provide a solution in any way. And so it literally, almost no matter what happened, it would never have occurred to me to turn to my mother.
I can understand what you're saying, and thinking from a overall mental health point of view, and that can include addiction, suicidality. It's so important. It all begins so many years before, right? The ability to have a safe, supportive, loving family where we can speak to our parent and say something is going on.
Right. Or that they might notice something from your behavior.
Yes.
I mean, there was a point when I was in junior high where I didn't shower that often. They didn't notice. My friends said something, you know what I mean? But my family never noticed. And so there was that. And then, yes, my mother could be violent. I mean, she was, she could be noticeably violent at times. One time she broke a hairbrush. Those thick plastic handle hairbrushes. She hit me with it, and it broke off the handle. Like, that's how hard she hit. But still, compared to what happened when I was 9, she married my stepfather, and the violence really escalated. He was very violent with her. I think we underestimate children being exposed to domestic violence. Witnessing parent on parent violence is a trauma by itself, even if you're never the one who gets hit. But he was also physically and sexually violent with me. And so the violence escalated. I had some additional behaviors like the showering. Later on, I started cutting. I didn't even know anybody else did it for like years afterward. It wasn't where the internet, you look this stuff up now, right? I had no idea other people did it. It was just something that, I thought of and started doing. And I had the drug use very, very young, very early on, which was a response to the stress and pain of what was happening in my life.
And was your stepfather or mother or any other adults in your life using substances at that point?
I mean, my stepfather drank some, and certainly when he drank, we were at higher risk, of either an incident starting or it escalating to, beyond sort of his norm. It would be more likely to escalate at the higher levels. But I don't know that I would call him an alcoholic. My mother had a gambling and a shopping problem, so she had that behavioral disorder, but she didn't really drink or use drugs. Drug use wasn't common in my mother's side.
And did any teacher notice that something was off with you, or that you were withdrawn or acting out or having some difficulty? Or you mentioned your hygiene, you weren't being cared for that way?
Yeah, the hygiene thing was sort of short term, but I've always excelled at school. And so school was my haven. It's where I got positive attention. It's where who I was valued, that I was viewed as special by my teachers. They would, I got to go to the library and take out any book in the library, not just the book for my grade. You know what I mean? I got special things like that. They would take me from one teacher to the other to show her something I had done that the teacher thought was like well beyond my years. And so I got a lot of positive attention at school. And I think because I did so well, nobody was looking beyond that. Nobody was looking beyond. When I was later in my senior year of high school, I started missing a lot of school because I was on, methamphetamine, to such a degree. But that was the first time it really showed up in school. That was really the first time it showed up in school, unless they were looking, I don't even know what they would have seen other than a somewhat anxious child who did really well in school.
And were there ever calls to the police related to the violence at home?
Yes, a couple times. But this is in the 70s. And so, they basically would come and they would tell, my stepfather, go away and cool off or something like that. One time they did arrest him when he really, her life was at risk. I mean, it was possible he was going to, strangle her to death. I mean, that was the worst incident. That's the only time they arrested him, and he was out within 48 hours. And I don't actually know whatever happened to those charges. Nobody ever said. So I'm not sure, but that was the only time they ever arrested him. Most of the time, the neighbors wouldn't even call the police, but a couple of times other than that, they did call the police, but that was the only time the police did anything. So in my mind, I never viewed the police as like helpful, like somebody commits violence against you, go to the police, they'll do something about it. No, they only do something about it in my mind. What I learned from that was, unless somebody's trying to kill you, the police don't care.
And you mentioned that you started to cut yourself. Do you remember how that even started?
Yeah, so I started with drugs when I was 12, but the cutting started when I was in college. And so I was trying to do better with drugs. And so I was drinking more alcohol, doing less methamphetamine and other drugs, although still I was using chaotically into excess. But I had a glass bottle of beer one time and I broke it and I saw the glass on the ground and I thought, and I cut. And actually I cut that time I cut fairly badly, and it freaked somebody out who was with me because it was bleeding so much. But that's how it started. So then later I would purposely buy bottled beer, not canned beer, so that when I was drunk, I could break the bottle.
And how were you securing the drugs? And also was there a progression, right? The methamphetamine was happening later, but what was happening in the beginning?
Well, it wasn't that much later. So I started with alcohol, which was my first drug. It was when I was 12. And what I noticed about that first experience was how much better it made me feel. I mean, I felt like the pain was more distant, it sort of helped me numb, but also I was having fun in a way I wasn't used to having. I felt, I was giggling with my girlfriend and, we were having a good time. And that's captured my attention. What we need to acknowledge is that for those of us that develop an addiction, usually in the beginning, the drugs work. That's why we pursue them, right? Because they help in the beginning. And that's what it was for me. So I was making opportunities to drink right away. I would steal beer from my dangerous stepfather because that's how much I wanted the alcohol. But I also did quickly add in weed. There were pills around. There was a lot of LSD around. But I started using meth when I was 16, so pretty young. And I was shooting meth within 6 months at 17 years old. I was in full bore addiction with an IV meth addiction, basically my entire senior year of high school.
At what point did your mother realize, or did she ever realize that you had developed the addiction?
When I got arrested. So I got arrested right the summer between high school and college. In fact, I had to put college off for a year. I don't know whether she would have categorized it as an addiction. I never said it was an addiction, but that's the first time they had to face my drug use. So that was the first time. And she did find me a therapist. We lived in Central Jersey. He was actually at Princeton, but I didn't know it at the time, but he really didn't know anything about addiction. He put me on antidepressants. I ended up really like a high dose because they weren't working, and I just kept using meth. And so he didn't really, but again, it's like we're talking 1979. I'm sure there were many fewer, substance use experts at the time, but that's how he viewed it. He viewed my drug use as a symptom of depression. So he treated the depression, which didn't work out very well.
And were there other arrests related to your behavior at that time, or that was the one time?
That was the one time. And I wrote a piece for the Los Angeles Times, which is on my junkietojudge.com website, where I talk about part of why that is. And I was aware of it at the time. Like, for example, the last 10 years of my using, because I didn't get sober till 32. So from when I graduated college until sobriety, I had meth on me every day. And I was pulled over multiple times by the police for, minor accidents or speeding or whatever. And they never searched me, and I was always high and I always had drugs. And part of that is because I was a white middle-class woman, they just were less inclined. People, if I would have been a person of color in a economically disadvantaged community, I probably would have had arrest record because they get arrested. Those people of that group get arrested at higher rates for the exact same behavior that I was doing, but it wasn't noticed or pursued, and so I was able to slide through without any more criminal record than that one time.
After that year, what you said, in between high school and college, so now you're in college and you continued to be using the meth, did you say daily? How often were you using it?
So when I went to college, I did a little better. And I'm a lawyer where your word parsers. Better and good are not the same word. I did better. I used less stimulants, less meth, not that much for most of college, not until the middle of my senior year of college. And I started up again on a regular basis. But I used other drugs chaotically, just more contained, mostly on the weekend. Sometimes they'd roll into the week, but always to excess, always in very, my behaviors can be really outrageous to other people at times, always at a higher level than the people around me. People were concerned, but for me, it was somewhat of an improvement. But I had some really bad experiences in college. I had a 6-hour kidnapping and sexual assault by 3 men. I moved in with a violent boyfriend, and it was sort of like, the little grip I had, I lost. And in January of my senior year of college, I started using methadone on a basically daily basis. And I didn't get sober until I was 32. So there was a long haul there.
What led to your final, and I'll put final in quotation marks, because it's not final, life is in process, but recovery?
Yeah. So it was a combination. I know in the movies there's always this like epiphany event, and sometimes that happens. But I mean, a DUI can make people start recovery and be successful. Losing custody of their kids or being at risk can. But for many of us, it's more of a wearing down process. And that's what it was for me. So by 32, I mean, I couldn't hold a job. You know how after college you're supposed to work your way up the corporate ladder? Well, I had spent those years working my way down the corporate ladder, because I couldn't get to work because I was on meth. I couldn't focus. Every job was, less responsibility and less money. And also I was having physical problems from all those years of meth. My body was showing the suffering of it. I was feeling very trapped, very helpless, very miserable, at times very confused about why my life was the way it was. And my partner was ready to throw me out. So it was sort of everything in combination that made me finally say, well, maybe I ought to go to rehab. And so that's what I did. Yeah.
And what type of rehab did you attend?
So it was a longer term women's program in the Bay Area where I live. It was a 90-day minimum. So, I did know I needed longer, but also I didn't have insurance. I didn't have cash. So I had to go where I could get in. And in my mind, it was medical treatment. I'm going to go get medical treatment here. But it turned out they were adamantly and vehemently exclusively 12 steps, and 12 step is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all of the anonymouses. And I support 12 steps when it's the right fit for people, and a lot of people do well there, but a lot of people don't, and it wasn't the right fit for me. And I gave them multiple reasons why I couldn't do what they were asking, and they just kept telling me I was going to fail because I was self-will run amok, my best thinking had gotten me there, things like that, which really took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting it. And so at first I believed that because, they're the experts that I'm paying to treat me. And so I just decided I was going to use the parts that I could and ignore the bulk of it because it was a terrible fit for me. And so I really sort of, I read all the AA Big Book. I did all the homework in class. I thought about what they were presenting, but I tried to pull the pieces I thought I could use. But I still was really worried, what if they're right? Because they say you're going to fail, Mary Beth, you're going to fail. You're not doing what we tell you. And then when I got home from rehab, and it's like January of 94 now, and I always do emphasize for the younger people, there's no Google in January of 1994. But I started to think, is it true, that there's nothing else? And I went to the library. And it turned out it wasn't true, not even in 94. So I used other programs, Women for Sobriety, the parent to what is now SMART, and the parent to what is now Life Brings Secular Recovery. And so I really built what today we would call a self-empowered program, and a program based on a personal recovery plan, a plan that I built pulling ideas from different places and always listening and considering, but sort of viewing myself as the boss of my recovery, the decision maker, and putting together what I thought would work for me. And I do have 32 years of sobriety, so I think I did a pretty good job.
And during the course of the addiction and the process of recovery, were there ever times that you were feeling in such despair? Like, I can't do this. I wish I weren't alive. I wish I were dead. I'd like to kill myself. Or maybe one of these binges will take my life and that will be okay. What was going on for you that way?
Yeah, I never actively wanted to end my life. At the same time, I was willing to take risks with it. There were a lot of decisions about who I was with, or where I'd go, or who I'd get in the car with that were definitely life risk decisions. So I didn't have a high value sort of on self-preservation. And certainly the amount of drugs I was using were putting me at risk, but I never thought actively about ending my life. I have had friends that died by suicide, but for me, that wasn't it. I was willing to do a lot of harmful behaviors in order to keep my addiction going. But that's the definition of addiction, right? Continued use despite notable negative consequences. That's the core definition. But not to actively take steps to end my life.
And during the course of your recovery, did you see other mental health therapists? I would say outside addiction recovery, or seeing an adult psychiatrist? And I have one other question. What role, if any, did your primary care provider play in your recovery?
So the primary care is easy because I was always changing jobs. I didn't really have like a regular doctor. You know what I mean? I didn't have someone I had a relationship with because I didn't have insurance a lot of times, or it'd be a new insurance. So I didn't really have that. For the other side of it, I always knew that the violence was underneath my drug use, or at least I often understood that. And so when I got home from rehab, I did search for a therapist with trauma expertise, because I really thought I probably can't stay sober, but even if I could, if I want to be a happy and productive person, I got to deal with the violence side as well. And she diagnosed me, to my surprise, but correctly, with PTSD, which for me, today we would call complex PTSD. And for me, that showed it was very, very severe anxiety. So as a teenager, I had some anxiety, but a lot of depression. But when I got sober, it was really the anxiety. I mean, it was overwhelming at times. And I would just, I could just spin and spin on anything that I thought was going to go wrong. My husband called me the "what about tomorrow" girl, because no matter what was going on today, I was always worried. It felt to me like I was always on this edge of a cliff. And one little mistake, or maybe not even a mistake, one misperception or whatever it might be, and everything was going to blow up. I was going to lose it all. Like nothing felt safe and secure to me, even when I was getting sober and doing mostly the right things and making forward progress. It was hard for me to feel pride about my accomplishments or to trust in it. I always felt like any minute now, it's all going to go crazy and I'm going to lose it.
And what did your therapist do or help you in terms of addressing that underlying and understandable fear? It's like your amygdala was constantly on fire, right?
Yes. So we did a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, and she did some hypnotherapy as well. And then my husband and I also did couples counseling because our relationship was like at the edge of destruction. And so it was both those, and that helped with things like communication skills and other things like that. But and I would say my trauma recovery took much longer and was harder really than my substance recovery, and because it's more complicated, right? And it came first, it was underneath everything. So I really felt very solid in my sobriety by 2.5 to 3 years sober, but I was in individual and then group therapy for women with trauma histories in total, like 7 or 8 years. And I don't want to scare somebody because it's not horrible the whole time. It's gradual improvement, right? Getting better, a little better, a little better. Getting to the point where the extreme anxiety reactions are shorter or less often. It takes more to trigger me than it used to, that kind of thing. But it was a lot of work over a lot of years to get to the point where I consider myself like 95% recovered at this point.
In your profession as a lawyer and judge, were there times that the stories, the quote in quotation marks, cases that were before you would trigger you in some way or impact you in of course, you're there to be of service and help to them, but on a personal level, hearing their stories, how did that affect you and your mental health?
Yeah, so when I was a judge, I was appointed a judge when I had 20 years sober. And I hadn't actually even been in therapy probably for over 10 years at that point because I had done that work a long time ago. But at the same time, I heard a lot of disability cases. And so a lot of those involve people with mental health disorders and or substance use disorders. And therefore, a lot of those cases involve trauma and untreated mental health ramifications in their life. So I definitely saw a lot of people that had similar histories to mine, both from the violence side as well as from the drug and mental health side. And that I think allowed me to, for example, with the drugs, there was very specific law I had to apply about drug use and someone's ability to get benefits and how it impacted that decision. I couldn't change the law, but I can ask the questions in a way that's non-stigmatizing, that's not judgmental. Let's just have a conversation to get me the information that I need in a neutral way, right? Rather than thinking that because they have this drug history, they're, not a good person, or that they couldn't tell the truth, under oath or any of those kind of things, but rather just, here's the rules I have to apply. Let's have a conversation to get me what I need. And now we're going to move on and talk about something else.
At what point did you become an advocate?
Yeah, so I joined the board for Lifering and for She Recovers when I was still a judge. That was probably around 2017, I think. Yeah, around 2017. So almost 10 years ago now. And part of that was because once I got sober, I went to law school at 6 years sober when I was 39. So I'm building my recovery, I'm working on my trauma, and I'm also not a 12-step person. So there's not as much of a sort of a system in place to have you sort of work your way up when you're in the more individualized, self-empowered type programs. Like in Life, and we do have, a board, and we have committees, and conveners can talk locally, and we, train them and things like that. But it's not the same system. And also those programs were newer when I got sober in 93, 94. So I had dropped off. I didn't go to meetings for about 20 years. I didn't go to any peer support meetings. But when I was thinking about running my book, and that was when I was becoming a judge, I I looked again at, in the meantime, is there a way for me to be of service to my community? Let me try again. And that's when I found LifeRing, which evolved out of a group I had used when I got sober. And that's when a friend referred me to She Recovers, because She Recovers isn't just substance recovery, it's also trauma recovery, mental health recovery, behavioral disorders, gambling and gaming and all those things, because most of the women have more than one thing going on. And so that was a good fit for me because I had more than one thing going on. So that was when I started with it. It was around 2017 when I joined the board.
So within maybe the last 3 months or so, I saw a documentary. I think the name of it was Shuffle. It's a documentary on the bad people, put it that way, bad people who are preying on individuals with substance abuse, finding out about their insurance company, and instead of helping them, shipping them across the country to high-paying, corrupted programs. They're discharged. I see you're nodding your head. Do you know what I'm talking about? I mean,
Yeah.
I think there were programs in California and Florida that were highlighted. There may be other programs as well. And the director of the documentary, and the film won, it might have been like the best documentary at South by Southwest in maybe it was in 2025. He himself had used substances, was in recovery, and his treatment had been helpful to him. But that was years ago. And now he was hearing about people that were in and out of rehab programs and were doing worse and worse. And it piqued his interest. And that's how he learned about this. Could you say something if you know what I'm also talking about?
Yeah, so there's a couple sides to that. First of all, I'll say we do not have an integrated treatment system in the US for substance use. So, for example, I feel like when people talk policy, they judge people that are struggling with substances as if we offered everyone treatment on demand of an appropriate length, because not everybody, 30 days may not be enough, right? Also treating their other mental health disorders, also helping them get housing and employment supports when they get out, sober living. All of that is offered to people. So it's their fault if they're not succeeding, when that is not the way the system is set up at all. Many people can't access any treatment because they don't have insurance and they don't have cash. And then if they can access it, can be very difficult to evaluate a program and understand, is this an evidence-based program? Is this a good fit for me or my loved one who I'm trying to get in? It can be really difficult. There's no sort of standardization. There's not as much regulation as there needs to be. And that creates these opportunities for these brokers who are finding clients for these facilities, and they're getting like a kickback. And then when the person gets to the facility, sometimes the facility doesn't really care if they relapse, because then they can treat them or send them to the sister program.
Exactly.
And that, I think, it becomes this vicious cycle. So that's a problem. And I would say one of the common questions I get from friends and family is, how can I know how to pick a good program for my child? And part of the problem is they will often all use the same words. So most of them, if you go to the website, will say they're evidence-based. Well, those are words, and sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. And so a common question I get is, how do I tell what's a good program for my loved one? And so what I often will direct people to is SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has an evidence-based toolkit on their website. And so I always recommend that people read that evidence-based toolkit, because that will tell you what is an evidence-based program, what techniques and strategies have evidence behind them. And then when you're talking to these different rehab facilities, you can ask them questions. Do you do this? Do you do that? And if they do or they don't, well, how do you handle this? For example, how do you handle a relapse? If the answer is we kick them out, that's the wrong answer. Are you open to medication for opioid use disorder or alcohol use disorder. If they say no, that's the wrong answer. And so there's a lot of information you can get, but it is much more difficult for people to evaluate than it should be. And even if you have insurance, getting in a program that's evidence-based and of the right length for you, and with the additional supports you might need, like for your anxiety or your depression, or whatever it might be, it is excessively difficult in the US to do that.
Is this changing in terms of these policies?
There is a little bit more money for, well, there has been. We'll see. Medicaid's being cut, and Medicaid was a big payer for, people at a certain income level for treatment, and that's going to be radically reduced. But I will say there is more evidence. And so in the last 15 or 20 years, there's much more data, many more studies about what is working and what isn't working. There are more different strategies that have been tried, more different techniques that have been tried. There are more therapists who have been trained in substance use. There are more doctors who have been trained in substance use. So it is better than when I got sober 31 years ago, but it's not where it needs to be, and not where it needs to be if we want to give everyone the best chance of success. And so better, but not enough. And the other thing is the budgets for those studies and all of that it's been slashed now. So we probably won't get any more data for at least, it'll probably be another 3 to 5 years before very many new studies are funded, because those budgets are gone.
Mary Beth, circling back to the beginning, as it were, how can we better prevent young people from getting involved with drugs?
I love the question, because sometimes I can ask, what's the number one thing we could do to reduce the addiction rate in the US? And by the way, the US has one of the highest addiction rates in the world, and there are multiple reasons for that. But how do we prevent it upstream? So there's a couple of things with that. One is that the earlier that somebody picks up substances, the higher their risk of developing an addiction is. And so there's this push for just say wait. Like literally, if you wait from 15 to 17 or 18, your addiction risk is going to go down. If you wait until 20 or 21, it'll go down more. But the other side of that is that a lot of the impetus or the willingness to take negative consequences from substances is because of trauma histories and or untreated mental health disorders, or things like not having good skills in emotional regulation, things like that we can address all of those with mental health treatment on demand for kids, which we also don't have, and teaching them things like how to, emotionally regulate, paying attention to when they're a risk-taking type of child who does have a higher risk of developing an addiction. So there are definitely things that we can do. The just say no type of stuff doesn't work, but if we address their emotional needs and early on, we're going to significantly reduce the risk of them developing a drug problem. Because, for example, ACE scores tie very significantly to the risk of developing a substance use disorder, adverse childhood experiences score. If your ACE score is 3 or 4, you have 2 or 3 times the risk of developing an addiction. My ACE score is 7. So my odds were much, much higher. So, and that's why addressing those issues early, those adverse experiences, the emotional consequences of those adverse experiences, will reduce the likelihood or the odds of developing a problem with drugs later on.
How often is a young person's substance use leading into addiction related to other family members having addiction?
Yeah, so the data shows us, and there's different interpretations and different studies, but it looks like about 25 to 50% of someone's risk is based on their genetics. But that's, but therefore genetics is not definitive, right? It's not, it can run in your family and you don't develop a problem. It cannot run in your family and you do develop the problem. But definitely if it's in your family, you should pay more attention. So for example, I had a drug addiction. My sister did. My sister's partner did. Her kids, his and her kids, when they were young middle teens, I'd say, I had a conversation with them. And I said, you will see your friends having fun with alcohol or cannabis or other drugs. And what I'm saying to you is you have to be more careful, because you are at higher risk of developing a problem. And so you need to either not do it minimally, or be honest and admit if you're getting a problem so we can address it early on. So it's like, have that honest conversation. You are at higher risk. So you may need to make different choices, or at least keep your eye on the ball so that if a problem develops, we can intervene early.
Another question, Mary Beth. What are your thoughts of how in entertainment, put that in quotation marks, drug addiction is being, and the consequences of it is being fed to us? Is it being glamorized? Is it being distorted in some way? What are recommendations regarding the media?
Well, I will say the number one drug that's pushed in America is alcohol. And people don't always pay attention to that, right? Alcohol still kills more Americans than all the other drugs combined, except for cigarettes. And so we really undervalue the risk of alcohol. People think because it's legal, it's safer. And that is absolutely not true. If anything, cannabis is probably safer, although the high dose cannabis has risks too. And we should not ignore those risks. But alcohol has very severe risks. Alcohol is vicious. It's particularly vicious on women. We don't process alcohol as well as men do. It increases our risk of breast cancer, for example. Even moderate use increases people's risk of cancer. So I just always want to be sure when we talk about drugs that in our mind, we are including alcohol as one of the drugs, because a lot of times the conversation is focused only on non-alcohol drugs, when alcohol is often it's a frequent first drug and it's a frequent problem. It's the drug that many people develop a problem with. So that's part of it. But yeah, I mean, with media, I'm not sure, how big an impact seeing drug use has on developing an addiction. The reality is that most people use all drugs in moderation, right? And so we need to understand that. It's not that everybody who uses heroin develops an addiction, everybody who uses meth develops it's not. Most people don't. The majority won't. The group that develops a problem usually has other things going on. And so if they see it, glamorizing to me would be more likely to get people to try something, but trying and developing an addiction and being willing to suffer the negative consequences that is required in order to have a substance use disorder by definition, those are two different buckets, and sometimes I know like parents talk to me and they're concerned about any drug use. Like one woman was telling me her son was using cannabis and she doesn't want him to use cannabis at all. And I said, well, how often is he using it? Is he using it every day or is he using it twice a month at a party? And she didn't know the answer. And I said, well, that's an important distinction. So, I think if you're going to have a conversation with him, you should have the conversation around his actual level of drug use, because one is much more concerning than the other and may be a different conversation. So those kind of things are ideas I would just throw out there for that.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Tino, you've been listening attentively. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I want to start with, because as Ned was talking about the addiction rates in the US, and I mean the addiction rate, globally, I've always said on several shows that there isn't really a war on drugs. This is a narrative that's put out there by governments to make us think that they are doing something about it. And it made me think of the Netflix series, The Ozark. I'm not sure if you ever watched it.
No, I never have, but I'm happy to talk about the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Don't completely believe in, would you?
Quiet. You don't think it's important?
Well, it's just not that simple.
How is it not that simple? Drugs are addictive. They cause crime and death.
And they also prop up the U.S. economy.
I said quiet. What are you talking about?
Wait, are you familiar with gross domestic product? It's the total of all the money
I
spent
know
on
what
goods.
gross domestic product is.
I mean, I'd definitely sign something that says it'd be great if people didn't get addicted to drugs, but people are addicted to drugs. And in order to get the drugs, they have to buy them. There's even this theory that says drug money was the only thing that prevented the collapse of the global economy in 2008. When real estate went bust? Because drug money was the only cash available to prop up big banks.
Not to mention the 350 million narco dollars that paid for bridges and roads and healthcare, probably even education. Maybe even part of this school.
Would you step outside for a minute, please?
Yeah, I mean,
What do you have to say that's not fiction. That's non-fiction. That's the truth.
well, I'll say the other side of that is the way that
What's your
we
thoughts on it?
waste. Yeah, the other side of that is the way, to me, we waste money through the war on drugs, right? I mean, it's interesting because every time that the idea of decriminalizing drugs for personal use, for example, comes up, or somebody tries it in the US, like Oregon did, the results are expected immediately. Like, you better solve the entire drug problem and you got 6 months to do it. Okay. Like, that's the standard. We've had this war on drugs in the US for over 50 years, and the addiction rate is higher than it used to be. I've been sober for 32 years. Drugs are cheaper and easier to get than when I got sober 32 years ago. So it's failed. But to me, the war is real in the sense that it has destroyed many people's lives, because people are arrested, they get incarcerated. That impacts their professional employment opportunities when they get out. It impacts their housing opportunities. It destroys families, and it's very, very expensive. I mean, those are the numbers of the positive income generating numbers in the clip, but there's a lot of costs. And you can actually take that same money and treat 3 to 6 people for every, one person that you incarcerate. So that's the side of it that I focus on, is that if in America, we don't have a good, robust system for handling drug addiction, and we waste billions and billions of dollars every year on a policy that has proven ineffective, and we don't want to admit it.
Yeah. The only way we can defeat this is if we do it on the street, if we do it by ourselves, if we do it for each other. But if we're going to depend on some authority to do it for us, that's never going to happen, right? One question because of time.
Yeah, I mean, the person.
Yeah, no, sorry, you can finish.
I'm sorry, there's a lag. There's a lag. I apologize.
So, Marybeth, the first time that we met, you mentioned something, and you also mentioned it about 8 minutes into the show, and I want to bring it up on the screen, and I'll explain why I'm bringing this up. You mentioned that addiction is a mental health disorder. Let's get that out there. Just like you have a mild, moderate, or severe anxiety, you have a mild, moderate, or severe addiction. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because last week, with the guest that we had on Talking Back to Suicide, I pinned out the word addiction. Now, there's a stereotype around the word addiction. The moment you bring up the word addiction, automatically we think drugs, alcohol. But the brutal honest truth is we all, as humans, are addicted to something. Can be coffee, can be sweets. And what's trending at the moment, especially with the younger generation, is social media. So now if I'm a 15-year-old at home now, listening to the show, thinking to myself, okay, I'm on social media all the time, so now that makes me an addict, and now I got anxiety that there's something wrong with me. What do you do in that situation?
So I know people like to throw around the word addiction, like I'm addicted to coffee or I'm addicted to candy, but it's not always accurate for the definition. So remember, the core definition of a substance use disorder or any behavioral disorder like that is continued use or continually doing the behavior despite notable negative consequences. If you were drinking coffee and you aren't having notable negative consequences from it, you aren't addicted to your coffee. You may love your coffee. You may drink more coffee than you think you should. You may drink more coffee than all of your friends. But if it's not having significant negative consequences, it's not an addiction. But you are right that things like gaming can have a similar impact on people's lives. And that, to me, it's the same definition. Is that gaming behavior? Is that gambling behavior? Is that sex behavior having a notable negative consequence? And it would be the same thing with a severe, mild, moderate, or severe, right? Because that's not going to be an on or off switch. It's going to be at what level is it creating problems? And part of the test on mild, moderate, or severe is there are different factors you can look at. And, if you have 1 or 2, it's mild, and 3 to 5 or 6, it's moderate, and more, it's severe. And so it would be the same thing. If a child is gaming a lot, but they're, getting their schoolwork done, they still have friends, they still go out, they still participate in their family and all of those things, that's fine. If they're doing it and they don't do those things, that's a negative consequence. And it's hard to imagine you could game for 10 hours a day and do those things, right? So the number of hours that goes up, the more likely you are to have a problem. But I will also say that part of the reason these things are similar is because physiologically, there's a similar basis. It's about the dopamine bump, right? And so those behaviors give them a dopamine bump, just like the drugs give a dopamine bump. And that's part of the reason the behavior gets reinforced. It's sort of a habit formation problem. This makes me feel better for at least a few seconds. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. That's sort of one of the core reasons that is at the basis of all of these sort of similar behaviors that can create problems.
Yeah, that was the answer I was looking for. Thank you so much on elaborating on that. I got one more for you that you also said. Why rock bottom is a dangerous myth and how to seek help at any stage. Do you want to chat about that?
Yeah, so
Because
there's
it
this
is a dangerous myth.
It is. It is dangerous. It is dangerous because so there's this old idea that nobody gets better until they hit some horrible rock bottom, right? Oh, well, they're just not ready yet, or rehab didn't work. It's not that the rehab was bad. It's that they weren't ready yet. They haven't had a hard enough rock bottom. This is old ideology. That's dangerous. People can die waiting for a hard enough rock bottom. They can have irreversible medical consequences. But the truth is, rock bottom is not like an objective standard. Like, when A, B, and C happened, now I'm at rock bottom. It was always retrospective. Like once I get some sobriety under my belt, looking back, where was my bottom? So it's not like it's a standard. But the other reality is that it's risky to wait for that. You can, the longer you wait, if you have a substance problem, the longer you wait and don't address it, the more likely you are to have employment complications or negative consequences, the more likely you are to have an impact on your marriage or your ability to parent or your ability to stay housed or your health. All of those risks will go up the longer that your use disorder keeps going. And so if you address it at the mild to moderate level, first of all, there's less years stuck in the sort of chaotic misery that an addiction can be. But also when you get sober, you have less to fix. It's actually advantageous to do it earlier. I don't have as many problems that I've created through my addiction that I need to address. I love when people walk in the rooms and they're still married and they still hold a job. Like, good for you. You came early. Good job. Let's deal with it now. So it's not that you can't. I mean, when I take the diagnostic test, for mental health disorder, substance use disorder, I end up at the very severe level if I took it the day before rehab, right? And I got sober, long-term recovery from the trauma and everything. But your path will be easier. And it'll be, you'll lose less time and be less miserable if you address it early. And that's what we focus on today. Let's address it early. It's one of the reasons for something like Dry January, right? It's a way for people to take a break from their alcohol or other drug consumption, which helps them see if it's actually hard to take that break. Do I have a problem? But even to see early signs, even if they don't have let's say, alcohol use disorder, it can tell you, am I actually using the alcohol in a way that's in my own best interest? Or am I using it every time I get angry instead of dealing with what's causing me to be angry? Or also I am increasing my, risk of cancers and other things. So all of those things tie together. We want people to, try to intervene early. You don't have to wait until your life has completely destroyed to address this. You can get help early on. And also I'll mention what help you need can depend on if you're at the mild, moderate, or severe level. So if you're at the mild or moderate level, you probably don't have to go to an inpatient program for 30 days or 60 days. You might be able to do an outpatient program or just work with an addiction therapist and your doctor. And so it'll also mean that your treatment options will be more robust and that you may not have to take time off of your job and those kind of things.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Mary Beth, I'm thinking of it. There might be family members listening where a loved one is struggling with addiction. What are your thoughts on tough love?
Yeah, tough love has bad data. It doesn't. It works for some people. Most things work for somebody, but it doesn't work for most. It works for a minority. It's around 30. The evidence-based practice that works twice as well as tough love, that works more at the 60 to 65% level, is called CRAFT. Community reinforcement and family training. CRAFT is more positive reinforcement focused, and it's also about having sort of non-judgmental, non-emotional discussions about like what purpose are the drugs serving for you, what are you getting out of them, and working together as a team to develop a treatment plan rather than telling your loved one, you're going to this program that I picked for you and you're doing it today. And there's a really excellent book based on CRAFT for friends and families, and it's called Beyond Addiction. And it's on Amazon and all the usual sites, a book and a workbook. And it talks about all of those CRAFT things, as well as how family members can take care of themselves while they're in that traumatic situation of having a loved one whose life might be at risk from drug use. So definitely Craft works much better, and Beyond Addiction is the best book I've ever read for friends and family.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. How can our listeners learn more about you, your book, where to purchase it, and your other services?
Yeah, so the book, again, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, is on Amazon and all the usual sites, and bookstores have it or can get it. And there's a lot of information on my website, which is junkietojudge.com, including my opinion pieces like the Wall Street Journal piece or the LA Times piece. And people can message me through my website. So if anybody has questions or they have a speaking opportunity, message me through my website and I definitely will respond to that. And I will also say I am on X and Blue Sky, and on my social media, I only post about substance use, addiction, mental health, trauma, and recovery. That's it. I don't post or like anything else. I stay narrowly focused. And if you're interested in the new studies that come out, opinion pieces, articles, or my recovery thoughts, that's what I do on my social media.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. I know that anyone listening to this podcast is going to benefit. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and good to see you again, Kino.
You too, Mary Beth. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you.